When it comes to measuring helpful metrics for your church, the question is, what should you track and how often? And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 helpful metrics to track at your church.
Well, thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 7 helpful metrics that your church should track.
So this is a partially, especially if you're in the church planning phase, but just in general, we've had a couple of metrics. We call it our data tracking sheet. So we have a Google Doc that the elders have access to, and so for our meetings every month, everybody can see where certain metrics are. And some of these might be obvious, and some of these might not be as obvious, but we have found that these are helpful things to know and to measure to see how you're doing in various areas.
Yeah, one thing I found, we do, like you said, we do this all on a Google Sheet, so it's pretty straightforward and very easy to, if you Google how to Excel certain things, it's the same way. Like it's easy to figure out even if you don't have a lot of experience with Excel or with Sheets. But one thing I found is here and with other places I've worked is everyone wants to track certain things, and like we have church management software, like we use Planning Center, and people use different things, and everything does some sort of tracking of different things, but nothing seems to ever track everything you want to track. Like we're going to give you ideas, but you might come up with something else that you want to track that may not fit into a certain software. So we just found it was easier to create it just the way that we want it. It works for us. And so that's what I would recommend, is just to create your own.
Yep. So it's a Google Sheet, and each one of these is a different tab.
Yes.
And it's all right there, and it's easily accessible. And so here are 7 helpful things that you could track that you might be helpful, especially over the long term.
Yep.
The first one is probably the most obvious, but that is attendance.
Yes.
But it's helpful because we have like an attendance. We also use a Google Sheet for this, like where we track attendance. That's different than the data tracking, where it's like more formalized and it has like the attendance breakdown of like kids and parents and serve team, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And our data tracking sheet is just the Sunday date and the total attendance, because it doesn't need all that breakdown, but it's all in one space. We have, I don't know how to do these things, but we have not just the data like on the spreadsheet, we also have like the graph. That's on there. But it's super quick to look at. You can see like the big overview all at once. Like again, like our attendance tracking sheet, that's like the normal one that we use for staff, is more detailed, and it's got like each year has its own tab, so you got to like click through it. But the data tracking sheet is just, it's all in one place. And so tracking your attendance in an easily readable format where it's easily scannable, and you can put like the little code so you can actually add a graph in it as well. But that's one of the things that we track. That one might seem obvious, but it's a good place to have it in a central location where your leaders can access it.
I think it seems obvious, but I feel like I hear a lot of conversation about how attendance isn't the most important thing to track. And I think we agree it's not the only thing you should track and the most important thing. But at the end of the day, it does matter if throughout time, especially if you're making if you don't have these huge changes in attendance, to know if you're trending upwards or downwards. I just think it's helpful to know. So one thing about this, which I didn't mention, is this is, because it's in a Google Sheet, this is something that is shared with our entire elder team. And so all of these things are different tabs, and we have a graph for each one. So it's very easy for any of our elders, before we have a meeting or anything like that, to be able to go in and not having to sift through a ton of data, but just to be able to look at a graph with a trend line and be able to see this past month or whatever time frame we're talking about, are things going up or down? And there's more detail if they want to get into the weeds of it, but this way you can really see just a broad strokes overview if you want kind of a quick summary of what's going on.
And this is helpful too, because especially in the early years, your attendance, 8 people can make like a massive difference depending on how big your church is. And so it can be really easy to freak out week to week or month to month. But if you have somewhere where you can see a trajectory, again, this is where a graph is helpful, of like the last 3 months or 6 months or whatever, it might help you not freak out as much and give you a realistic trend of where things are. Because again, one family in a church that's 50 people can make a massive difference.
Yeah. So and you want to kind of look at the bigger Sundays, like Easter, or like if you have a bigger Sunday like a anniversary or something like that, you want to be able to look at them in some perspective. We want to get excited that they're a bigger Sunday, but also we want to look at the overall and realize that some of these are kind of spikes on the graph, and that's fine. Like those should happen, but that we're not basing everything around those spikes.
So that's the first one. Probably the most obvious is attendance. The second one,
so much less obvious,
also pretty obvious, is giving. And we mean basically, how do we? I don't even have a breakdown. We have it per month on this. It's not per week,
correct.
Right? It's just each month and the total amount given. Now we also, I think one way that you might not think to do this and how we do this is that we have total giving as a tab, but then we have, or how do we have it? Do we have total giving and then outside giving? Or
We
do
have total giving, and then we have essentially local giving.
Okay.
So giving.
Opposite of what I was saying.
Yes.
So we
opposite,
have the
yep.
total giving of all that we have received, and then we have another tag that's just local giving. And by local giving, we mean people that are a part of New City Church.
Yes.
Especially in the early years, you might have outside, churches supporting you, or a denomination, or like friends or family or whoever, people who are giving to your church who are not a part of your church. And it's really helpful to have that distinction, to know what is the giving trends between in your own local body and outside, because it could be, giving could look really good or look really bad, and you can make projections and plans without looking at your localized giving.
Yeah.
And so again, for us, it's helpful not just in the sense of how's local giving going, but if you have commitments to a network or denomination where you have to give a percentage of your local offering, typically it's your local offering, not like all your support, outside support. So you also need a differentiating factor between, let's say we took in, I don't know, $10,000 the last month, and 8,000 of it was local offering and 2,000 of it was outside. Well, if you have to give like a small percentage to your denomination or network or whatever, you want to make sure you're doing it on the local offering and not all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we'd agree that giving or tithe is a big sign of strength and spiritual maturity in your church, not just in a matter of if we can keep the doors open, but if your people are growing in their faith and things like that, because as they do, then as most of us preach, then their giving would be going up as well. And so it's helpful to know what's actually coming from inside the church, because outside of the church is really less of tithing as much as fundraising, which is good, which you need. But as that grows, that's good. That helps keep the lights on, but that doesn't necessarily translate to spiritual maturity and people growing in their faith. And so it really helps to know you have to know all the money that's coming in to know your financials and things like that, but it's really helpful to know separately from that just what your people are doing, so you can see if, and it's helpful to know against attendance too, because if your attendance is going up and your giving is steady over a longer period of time, not just over a couple months, but over a long period of time, then it gives you some information of, hey, maybe this is something that we need to actually talk about more. Or if your if your giving is going down, then obviously that's a sign of potentially an issue. So it's just it gives you a lot more information than just the financials.
Yeah. So again, giving might seem obvious to track, but we would encourage doing your total giving, but also just your local giving, so you can get that information that you might miss if it's just all giving total.
Right.
So that's the second thing to track, is giving. The third thing that's helpful that you might not think of is number of donors or giving units, or however you want to, use the terminology.
Yeah.
The number of people that give. Now, again, giving units is helpful because if you have a family and they give, you're not going to have let's say they've got a family of 5, you're not going to count 5 of them separately. It's one giving unit for the family. And so each month we track how many giving units or donors, however you want to say, gave, which is also helpful as we see trends of if giving goes up and down, how much is it of people giving more, how much of it is people giving less, or less people giving.
Yeah.
That can help you find information. And so you don't just want to track your giving numbers, you want to track how many people are actually giving each month. And this is really helpful, especially over time. It might not seem so helpful in the beginning, but you can start to see, we're 3.5 years into this, so we can see trends of when, in the year we have more donors give and less. And so we don't maybe freak out as much or kind of try to make plans inaccurately. And so a lot of this is every month. If you can kind of track that, it helps you as you go forward to know, well, typically less people give here and more people give there, and helps you get more information you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, I think this one is especially helpful now during COVID times, if you're watching this live, because especially if you've already planted, I think that there's a lot of, different things that can happen that might kind of skew things. Obviously everyone's kind of worried about, or not necessarily worried, but concerned about where the church may be heading, whether your doors are open or not. Yeah. But there's also times where, because things are more uncertain, that people who are more well off or not as affected may give more, which is helpful, which is great. And so it may look like things are potentially a little bit better, but if you're seeing that giving may be up this month, which is great, but our units are down because more people are getting affected by it, or whatever the reason, then it really helps you really put in perspective where your entire congregation is, and helps you kind of avoid those. It's kind of like attendance, avoid getting maybe not overly excited, but overly excited about those kind of spikes, and kind of give you a more realistic picture of what's going on.
Yep. So number of donors every month is a really helpful tool. Something
Yes.
that you might not think is helpful, but it's especially for all of these, the longer you do them, the more data you have. It's really helpful.
Yep.
So number 3, number of donors. Number 4 is website views. So this is we just track how many page views. So it doesn't matter if they clicked it 50 times or one time. Just
Yeah.
every month at the end of the month, how many people visited our website. This can be helpful. It's interesting to see the months that are high and low. Again, it's just interesting information. If you have a lot of new visitors or not a lot of new visitors, there might be some correlation between how many new people you have and how many visit your website. And so it might not seem like that big of a deal, but everyone checks everything out online before they come in person. And so having an idea of how often people are looking at your website, when might give you ideas to put on your website and that sort of thing. But tracking how many people go to your website every month.
Yeah, and some of these, like this one in particular, isn't necessarily going to give you, in my opinion, like a huge wealth of information of like we need to make these big changes based on this data, but it'll help you see trends. It'll help you see if things are if your attendance is going up, then logically your website views are probably going up because people will check you out online beforehand. If your website views are going down, that may be, I'm not saying it is, like we haven't necessarily had this happen, so I can't say for sure, but if you see your website views start steadily going down, that may be an indicator that attendance may start going down because you're going to start having less new people. And so it's not that all these are necessarily the most important one, but it just helps you give you a better overall picture of how different areas of your ministry are going.
And we've actually seen this happen for us. So with COVID, we started gathering again in end of June, just doing one service instead of 2 before COVID. But in September and October, we had more new people, and we know this because of how many Connect cards people fill out. In like a 2-month span that we've ever had in any 2-month span of our church. And then in November and December, we've had hardly any new people.
Much less.
And I think a lot of it is COVID, obviously, the numbers going up. But what's interesting is our website views are the same thing. We had really good website view numbers September and October. And then November, because we're still in December right now, I mean, it was low, which in some degree makes me feel a little bit better because I know it's not like we did something terrible and people don't want to come anymore.
Right.
It's like
Right.
people just aren't looking, and that's and that's helpful. And again, COVID makes things different, but I think it might be helpful. For you in the future is like if you have a time where not very many people are coming, but let's say your website views are the same, well, that might be your website isn't clear. And we have various episodes on what you should put on your homepage and that sort of thing that can help you. But it just, I don't know. It doesn't change the fact that as all churches are, we're trying to figure out how to keep moving forward as the longer that COVID progresses. But it is helpful to know that a lot of people just aren't even looking to go to church right now, and we see that reflected in the low number of views we had in November.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing where this stuff you can just look at it as website views, and it goes up and down, and it's whatever if you're not that versed in web traffic and things like that. But if you really dig into it and kind of realize what some of these things mean, it can really give you a lot more information than you get just if you didn't would get if you didn't track them.
Yep. Now, and depending on your web host or where you put your website, they might do it natively, they might not. We use Google Analytics, so if your website provider doesn't tell you how many site views you have, Google Analytics, it's super easy. You just put this code or something injected in your website, which if you don't know anything about websites, it sounds really confusing. But they'll walk you through exactly where to put it. And it gives you a whole bunch of other detail too, not just about page views, about who's going where and time spent on the site. But all that to say, if you don't have it, Google Analytics, it's free. Put it in your website and start tracking your page views.
Yes.
So that was number 4. Number 5, this is something I don't know if we added later, if we've always had.
I think we added a little bit after we started.
Mostly
tracking.
because I needed help. And this is really helpful, especially if you're maybe a lead pastor and numbers is not your thing. That is your assets.
Yep.
And so for us, we track our assets, and it's different because money in the bank is not necessarily, Brian, you're going to have to help me on this.
Yeah.
You'll have to take the lead on this after I fumble through explaining it. Okay. Money in the bank is not necessarily your churches to use. Yeah. Like some of it, if you are supporting like a church plants, or if you have people that raise support through your church, and so you might have other liabilities, loans or whatever, I don't know. So just because you have X amount of money in the bank, it doesn't mean that it's actually usable from your church. And so we created an assets tab mostly for me because every month I would read the reports and I would just be like, okay, but how much money do we actually have? Because I have no idea. And it makes it, again, simple, even for your elder team, your leadership team, to just be able to click the tab and know, okay, how much money do we actually have? And of course, you can see the trends. Is it going up or is it going down? So, Brian, you can explain this better than I can.
No, I mean, that's right. So this is helpful to do from the very beginning because it gets you in the habit of doing it. So we just, we've talked about, we just sent out School Plan to Church. Adam, who was on staff here, And as we're helping him get things up and running, he's doing the same thing. Although he doesn't have anyone raising support right now yet. He doesn't have any like debt or anything like that. And so for him, pretty much money in the bank is money in the bank for him. But we still track this because it helps as he grows, as people come out and raise support. It helps getting used to the fact that we don't just look at, it's not a good habit to log into the bank account to see how much money you have. There's maybe more that goes into it. So yeah, we have a balance sheet that has all of our information on it, and it has our equity and our liability, and then our assets at the end. And so that way you're not just looking at the total in the bank, but it removes things like if people are raising support through your church, like in your bank account, if you have any debt, or if you use credit cards or anything like that, or if you have like money earmarked for anything, like if you have restricted assets, so to speak. Like
so we have like a benevolence fund,
like a benevolence fund.
We moved, and so we had a building fund, lots of stuff.
All those things. So that things that are earmarked for certain things, so that if you look at your account, you're not just like, great, we have all this money, but stuff is designated to certain things, and so you have an idea at the end of the day of how much is actually available cash in your account. So it is helpful to track.
Tracking your assets tab might be easy in the beginning, but like Brian said, it's easy to get into the habit of it, and that just lets everybody know how's the church actually doing financially each month. Number 6 is social media follows. And now you could, depending on what you use, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever else. We only use it for Facebook because Twitter is like a lot of less people use it, so we kind of post there not super consistently. And Instagram is not really helpful because we have a bloated amount of Instagram followers, because in the beginning we just had a lot of people that don't necessarily come to New City that followed it, whatever. So it's not really helpful for us, but we do Facebook likes and Facebook follows on the same tab. For us, and we don't, I guess the way you should do it, I don't know, but like all of our Facebook likes are organic. Like we haven't paid to advertise. Like we don't, it's just, if you like our page, you like the page and you've interacted with us in some way. And so it's helpful just to know online, like how things are going. Like, do you have a month where a lot of people are engaging with your stuff and it going up, and how are you doing on that? And so that's just really helpful. They've recently, I guess this year, added follows, which I don't fully know the difference. We have more followers than likes. I wish it would be one thing, because I guess you can click follow without like. It doesn't make any sense to me. But regardless, it's helpful to know, is it going up? Is it the same? Is it going down? We actually had, and we recognize this because something happened like within like the first 6 months of our church. We had like 150 likes. I don't even know if it was first 6 months. It was very early, some amount of time. And maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong. And we lost like half of our likes. And they were legitimate people that liked it. And so we had to like talk to Facebook and try to figure it out. And I think they didn't tell us what happened, but people had to re-like it, and there was nothing we could do. Now, so stuff like that is helpful too. It's like if there was a drop, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe I don't know, but again, it might not seem like it matters that much because you can just look at it. But again, as your church goes, it's really helpful to have month-to-month metrics, and how many people are following you on Instagram if that's a consistent platform, or how many people are liking your stuff on Facebook if that's a consistent platform. Just having more ways to measure your engagement with people.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's obviously, I mean, if you've ever listened to this podcast, you know how much we value online engagement, and so it's an obvious thing that the moral of the story at the end of this is anything you follow or anything you value, you should track, because that's the only way that you can really know how it's going. And so if you value social media, which we do, and we think that you should too in this day and age, then you should track how you're doing on it. I mean, it's obviously consistent posting is helpful, or is a good thing, and quality posting is a good thing. But at the end of the day, if you're doing all these things and you're not gaining any new followers or anything like that, then you're engaging people you already have, but you're not reaching anybody new. And so it's time to figure out what the reason for that is, if there's a reason. And so it's just one of those things where if it's something you value, then you need to track it and see how the trend is.
So social media follows might seem like, I didn't really think of that, or is that really important? We can just tell you, for 3.5 years, it's really valuable to have this information. So the sooner you can start it, the better. Which leads us to last but not least, and this might be something you don't think of. We didn't start doing this for a while until we realized we should probably do this. And that is tracking every month how many Connect cards you take in, or whatever you call them. Because this also tells you two things: how many new people you have. Not everybody fills out a Connect card, but some people do, so you can gauge it. And also tells you like how many people are actually coming back. So if you get all of these Connect cards and yet your church is staying the same size, either they're not coming back or people are just leaving. Like maybe they are coming back, but other people are leaving and you don't have a way of seeing that. And so how we do it is we have on our attendance sheet, not the Google data tracking, but on our attendance sheet each Sunday, one of the things that we measure is how many Connect cards we have. And then at the end of the month, we have our own sheet for the data tracking that just says Connect cards, where we can put in how many we know, which is how, as I said a little bit before, we knew September and October were our most Connect cards ever. And then November and December have been like the least we've ever had. And so, just again, it helps you know, are people connecting? Are they coming back? If you're having a lot of Connect cards and your numbers are staying the same, there's probably an issue in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think this is a helpful one that kind of counterbalances attendance a little bit, because if your numbers may be going up potentially and you're getting new people in the door, but it's a lot harder it's a lot easier to tell if new people are walking in the door than to tell if they're staying, than to tell if they're coming back week after week, because new people get the most attention. It's just the way it is. And so this is a way to tell. Potentially, I mean, it's not perfect, but this is a way it gives you a better idea if people are interested in engaging. Obviously, if you, like we do, we give people a Chick-fil-A gift card for filling out a Connect card. That's our little gift. Obviously, there's occasions where people fill it out without intentions to come back to get a gift card. It's just the way it is. I mean, so it's not like it's a perfect of every single person filling one out is coming back, but it gives you a better idea of who's engaging than just if your attendance numbers are going up.
Yep. So, have Connect cards, and we have an episode somewhere about what to put on your Connect card, which is basically we keep it to just your name, email, and phone. The more things you have, the less likely they are to fill it out. So sometimes it stinks not to have their address, but if they get connected, we're going to eventually figure it out anyway. And so tracking them. But now the thing with this is you have to do it every Sunday. It's easy to be like, well, I'll just remember and I'll do it next week. Like that needs to be part of the routine. Is every Sunday, every Monday, when you put the attendance in, you also put the Connect cards in so that you don't miss them or forget them.
Yes, data tracking is pointless if it's not accurate.
Yes, and again, this is helpful too over time, especially as some of the years go by. You can see traditionally what months do we have more new people and what months do we not have as many new people. That could be helpful. So tracking your Connect cards. Now, those are 7 metrics. You could measure a lot of things. I think it's helpful though to keep it to stuff that's actually useful. So for example, we talked about, it's not on our list, baptisms, because for us and probably for most church plants, you're probably not baptizing people every month. And so having, 3 or 4 and then 0, 0, 0 and then 1 and then 0, 0 and then 2, that's not really helpful. So we also, for example, we don't track how many people are on our serve team just because for us, it doesn't seem like that's really helpful to do. So there's a lot of things that you could do. I would just say, don't just have a bunch of stuff to have it. Make sure it's something that changes every month and, is useful. But I would say, if you're not sure if something is good or not, just put it and add it, and then you can take it off later. Because we've done a couple of those. We've had things where we're like, we're not using this anymore. It's never a bad thing to have too much information. And so these are the 7 things we said. Again, attendance, giving, and kind of differentiating between regular and outside giving, number of donors, website views, assets, social media follows, and Connect cards. Those are 7 helpful things we use, but you might find other things. Just put it somewhere and make sure you do it every single month.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say. Is it's obviously these are what we use. We may add things over time, but these are the things that we found to be the most helpful. You may have certain things that you really value that you think really need to be tracked, and I would say do them if it's something that you feel is useful, but don't. You don't want to get, how do I put this? You don't want to get too into the weeds of trying to comb through too much data every time you have a management team or elder meeting. And in other words, don't track every single movement everybody makes. You want to track things that are important. If you're unsure, erring on the side of caution and tracking it just to be sure for now is a good, rule. But I would caution you away from just tracking things for the sake of tracking them. If you don't see any importance in tracking it, and if your elder or management team sees no importance of tracking it, even if it's one of these, then don't feel guilty about not tracking it. Talk it over with your team and do what's most important for you guys. But I just caution you away from having a management team meeting where an hour of it is or 2 hours of it is just combing through data, because that's not helpful.
The point, I think, of all of this, though, is to have a easy location where some of the big things are easily found and discoverable and readable, or whatever the word is. So that doesn't take forever trying to find it in various places, having it all in one place. So those are 7 metrics your church should track. If you're with us, again, we always would encourage you to join the Practical Church Planting Facebook group. If you're not a part of that. And also, we've brought back the YouTube videos, or the videos of this podcast, Practical Planting on YouTube. You can watch the videos there. And thanks for being with us. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.